Today we are delighted to meet Charlotte Harrington, co-CEO of Belu Water. She shares her journey from a traditional retail background to becoming the leader of a social enterprise. She discusses the importance of values in business, the impact that social enterprises can have, and the evolving landscape of the conscious consumer. Charlotte also highlights the innovative structure of her leadership role as a co-CEO and the unique advantages of having two leaders and the resilience that they have both learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, Charlotte asked her younger self to trust her gut and past experience a lot more in future decision making. I hope you enjoy. Charlotte, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us on Swim Against the Tide.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So, as we were explaining, it's a bit of a tradition to allow people to understand where you're coming from, both in terms of personally and as a business. It'd be good to give everybody a bit of a history of how you've got to your position now, and a bit of your career and a bit of what's formed you into the great leader that you obviously are.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I started my professional life in retail. I wasn't quite sure what to do after university. I knew I wanted to go into business, but I wasn't sure quite what I wanted to do within business. And I started essentially working at WH Smith's in their head office, trying to pretend that I was going to be an accountant. So I started training and doing my kind of SEMA exams.
That's not normally what people say, is it? I want to pretend to be that.
Well, I wasn't sure what to do, so it did feel like pretending. And now I look back, I'm like, I was definitely pretending. My maths was never going to be good enough. But it was a great insight into how a business works. So it was probably the best year's foundational introduction to business, having not studied business studies, that I could have got. So it was brilliant, but it definitely wasn't where I saw myself. But because I was in the commercial side of the business, it did give me an insight into what the commercial teams were doing. And that's really where I found my kind of calling. So I worked in their buying teams and worked in all sorts of categories, from buying their kind of cards to their stationery to quite a long stint in newspapers and magazines back in their heyday. And then from there I moved on to Tesco and worked there for 10 years. So I was there again in various different guises within buying. And there I did everything from actually thinking about it. Some of these are now defunct categories, but at the time were massive, like entertainment DVDs and CDs.
Oh, yes.
Christmas decorations. So I have bought all sorts of non-food categories. And having done that for 15 years, as much as I loved it, it was relentless. And it was the sort of environment where you really have to be on top of your game 100% of the time. And I was beginning to figure out that maybe life didn't have to be like this. And I had 3 children in quite quick succession. So I had 3, no, I'm lying actually, I had 2 children, and I was pregnant with my 3rd. And I just thought, you know what, I can't go back to this. And unfortunately at that time, the idea of working flexibly, or the idea of going back to a role at the level that I was at on a part-time basis, just wasn't really entertained. But it was now I look back, it was a different time. It was about 10 years ago now. So I decided at that point I was going to take a bit of a career break, and I was going to bring up my kids. Whilst on my career break, I got approached about this business called Belu, which I'd heard of, and I recognised the bottle, but I didn't really know much about it. And then once I started to do a bit of reading and research, and I understood that it was a social enterprise and that it was a business that was a business but actually traded in a very different way, because it wasn't about shareholder returns, it was about what impact and what can you deliver for others, I was really curious. So the purpose of the business then was that 100% of the net profits went to WaterAid. And for me, that pull was too great to stay on my career break, which lasted about a year. So whilst I was really on maternity leave, and I then joined Belu as Chief Operating Officer. And Belu at that time was about a £3-4 million business. And I think in the first year that I joined was giving about £500,000 to WaterAid that year. It was a really small team. There were about 5-6 people. Everyone worked flexibly and everyone worked sort of part-time, so it probably was FTE of about 4 people. So I'd gone from sort of having a team of 80 people to working in a business that was, 6 people, which was a bit of a culture shock, but absolutely what I needed at that moment in time. And I think has enabled me to really play to my strengths and really find a place where you can get real satisfaction from what you do and feel really proud about the business that you work for in a way that I probably hadn't done for a large part of my kind of early career. So it was a really, I think having the kids was quite a pivotal point for me to redress what balance meant to me, and things people talk about now quite openly just weren't talked about 10 years ago in the same way.
I was about to say, it's very interesting because that was the setup of Belu was pretty progressive. Obviously we had a bit of this thing called COVID that forced a lot of change, but actually they must have been right at the forefront of that way of working, of sharing roles, of working flexibly around life, if that makes sense. And so that obviously appealed to you. Can I ask a question? It's quite interesting what we were talking about before, in terms of, were you actively looking for roles, or were you just trying to switch off and an opportunity tapped you on the shoulder?
No, I wasn't looking at all. So I was contacted by someone who I'd worked with, but probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, before he then approached me about this role at Belu. So I wasn't looking. I hadn't really been on LinkedIn at all. I was on mat leave. I was, very much in that kind of baby bubble. And it was very out of the blue. And initially my response was no, absolutely not. And my husband said, well, go and have a conversation. It can't hurt. And actually that conversation then led to the curiosity, I guess, being kind of sparked. And from there, it was a complete no-brainer. And I met the board, and suddenly it just felt a very sensible move, but quite a high risk move, I guess, in terms of my career. But at that point, I'd written off my career and gone, no, I'm just going to stay with the kids now for a bit. So to me, it was just like a perfect opportunity, serendipity.
Yeah, exactly. It suddenly gives someone the opportunity to achieve everything, which is very rare. But I think there's two things there, because I get a bit of stick from some of my mates that I'm always about to go have a meeting with someone, or go for a coffee with someone, or go for lunch with someone, and I spend my life doing that. But that's why I'd ask you that question, and back to what your husband, your partner, said to you, which was like, well, go and give them an hour. You never know. And if you hadn't gone, look what you'd have missed out. And that's why I think it's a great lesson, a life lesson to people, to say, opportunity's always somewhere, and sometimes you're not looking for it and it taps you on the shoulder. Otherwise, or sometimes you go, I'll give it a bit of time.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to take a risk, and that just may be a risk of giving up some of your time, but it may be a bolder risk. And I think not being afraid to do that, especially if your gut instinct is, yes, do it. Just find out a bit more. Do something that maybe pushes you out of your comfort zone. And certainly from a career perspective, that for me was a very different move to, I guess, what traditionally I would have considered.
And so who did you meet when you first went to see the business? Was it the original founders?
It wasn't the original founders, no. I mean, Belu was founded back in 2007 by a guy called Reed Paget, who was very much ahead of his time in the thinking and the ethos of the business. It was set up as a campaigning brand, a brand campaigning against bottled water, but brought out a bottle of water to make the point, to enable that conversation to start. So everything about it was always pioneering. But the original CEO the second CEO was the person that I met, was Karen Lynch. And it was her and the team and then the board that were there at that time that I met, who convinced me that it was a great business to join.
And was it the fact it was a social enterprise, or was it the fact that it was just so different to what you'd done that you thought, why not?
It was a bit of both. I mean, I think the fact that it was structured and there was this whole world of social enterprise that I'd never really heard of. It's the bit between essentially the commercial world and charity. And whilst I knew I was taking a career break, I also knew I would go back and do something. And I'd spoken to friends and people who worked in charities, and they'd all said to me, I think you'd find it really challenging. It'll be much more bureaucratic, much slower paced than you're used to. You probably wouldn't enjoy it. And so to find something that was between commercial and charity, to me, was the sweet spot, because actually I could use my commercial experience, but with a conscience, and do what fundamentally was the right thing, which is, I think, sometimes a bit of a challenge, or certainly had been a challenge for me in the commercial world, because it wasn't always what I wanted to do that I was being asked to do by the business.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the other extreme, haven't you, from some of the big corporates and commercial businesses. Because I think that's it. I think social enterprises sometimes get a bit of a stigma, like you say, that they get, and I don't mean it's bad on the third sector sort of thing, but they sort of go, oh, it's a charity, it's just all a lot of people just being nice to each other. But actually, social enterprise is, like you say, that perfect sweet spot where you can make money and then put that money to good rather than line shareholders' pockets, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Because everybody gets
exactly.
paid. Everybody, it's not as though you're all there going, oh yeah, I just rock up for 50p an hour. I'm fine. It's not, is it? It's a
But you
proper
get
job.
paid in a charity. And this is what
Yeah.
people sometimes don't realize is that charities are also like business. It's just that the end game is slightly different. So it is the social enterprise for me is the perfect balance. It is somewhere between a commercial business and a charity, but we run it as commercially as we possibly can because we want to deliver as much impact as we possibly can. And you can only do that if you have a successful business. But you need to pay people, you need an office. There are costs to doing business in the same way there are costs to running a charity.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? The driver is the better the business does, the more change it can impact. The other people are saying it's all about the bottom line, all about the bottom line, and actually forget their purpose, be that even if they're not doing good in the world, but actually sometimes their purpose of what their brand's about. We talk a lot of different work with loads of different brands, luckily here. And we have a process that we've actually now given a name to, which is called re-anchoring. Because what we find is a lot of brands start with a really clear idea of what they are and what they stand for, and then the market drags them over here and then over there, and they try and seek and dive and get opportunity. And it's really weird that they then forget why they were first being chosen. They have to go back. And it's fine. A lot of people do it. But I think it's really interesting the fact that you have started out with something and going, no, we know what we are and we stick to it because we've always got a very clear reason to why we exist, and we're not going to get distracted.
Yeah, and it can evolve though. So I think, the one thing that we hold fast to is our values and the DNA within the business. And I think because it was founded on such a strong belief that actually it needed to be environmentally best in class and it needed to deliver social impact, so our kind of our charity collaboration with WaterAid, those two things are then supported by a set of values that means that whoever comes into the business gets a sense very quickly of how to make a decision. And I think that for me was one of the biggest changes, is that we don't have a set of values that just sits on a beautiful board in the office and nobody refers to or uses. We use those values to make decisions. And for me, that was a real light bulb moment in terms of the power of having that, anchoring your business and anchoring everyone within that, especially as you get bigger, actually. So easy to keep it quite tight when there's 3 or 4 of you, but actually once you get to sort of 10 or 12 people, making sure that everybody knows how to make a decision in this business is really, really important. And then you can keep the kind of purpose of the business within that mix, and you never deviate from it. And it can evolve, and it can, people can tell the story in their own way, and that's really important too. But actually, it's all from the same place.
And is the founder still involved with the business at all, the original founder?
No, he's not, and hasn't
No.
been for many, many years. But I would hope that he's very proud of what he initiated, and where it's going, because we are very much at our heart still the business that he dreamt of
Yeah.
creating, and we've existed now in the UK for many, many years in the sort of in the bottle that he planned to kind of use to help change people's perceptions of the environmental challenges that we have, that 20 years ago people weren't talking about, and only today really are people starting to really understand.
Yeah. And having to learn incredibly quickly and hopefully quick enough,
Indeed.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
tell us a bit more about the offer that Belu has in terms of the products. You offer not just the bottle, do you? You've got other
Yeah.
services into hospitality and into commercial world.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, we are a drinks business that faces mostly into hospitality and workplaces. So we're a B2B business, but actually lots of consumers recognize us because we're in some great hotels and restaurants. So people recognize the bottle on the table. So we do a range of bottled mineral water, we have a range of mixers and tonics, and then we also have a range of filtration systems that enable hospitality outlets or workplaces to serve still, sparkling, hot, cold water. So it's a sort of a one-stop shop for all your water requirements. And in working and choosing Belu, you can enable change across the world.
And have you seen sort of clients not demand more, but be much happier to realise they want to make a difference themselves now? Because in the past, I'm assuming a lot of it was driven by price. They could probably buy the equivalent product maybe cheaper, but are they starting to get a conscience? Are you seeing that coming through?
So I think the real change started when, if you remember a few years ago, Blue Planet really shone a spotlight on plastic bottles in oceans. And
Yeah.
at that point, suddenly people started saying to us, we know you've done these environmental initiatives. Talk to us more about that. Tell us what we need to know. And so I think it changed probably from that point, the conversation. It always used to be about the Water Trade Partnership, and that's still important to people, but actually all of the work we've done on carbon footprinting, on lightweighting our packaging, on ensuring that we know exactly where our raw materials have come from, all of that supply chain management, suddenly people wanted to understand a little bit more, in depth about. And, you can read so much in impact report, but if you're one of our customers, us explaining to you how we've done it, especially when you're starting out on that journey, I think is one of the things that people come to us about quite often. And I think for us, sharing and being open and transparent is part of our kind of value set that I alluded to, because we do want to inspire businesses to do things differently. We do want to demonstrate that you don't have to be a big corporate with big teams to have this opportunity, I suppose, to demonstrate that you can do your bit in the world, even if you're a small business. It just needs a little bit of thought and a little bit of a framework maybe, and you just need to believe that it's worth it. But I think that kind of conscious consumerism that you're sort of alluding to, it's there at the end consumer, but I think we're not talking directly to the end consumer. And sometimes that line gets blurred with commercials, because equally, if you think about our main customer base is hospitality, they've had a really tough time the last 5 years, as many businesses have, but as a sector, it's very volatile, and hospitality probably always has been. But I think therefore we see customers more challenged on price probably now than they have been, but they want to do the right thing as well. So for us, it's that trying to figure out how do we facilitate all of this while still making sure that we can deliver the impact that we want to deliver and have enough capital to then continue to grow the business. So it's a sort of ongoing challenge.
I think it's interesting that you're right. They're at the front end with the consumer, but as the consumer evolves and changes, and you can start to feel it. Again, we were speaking about this earlier about how now Gen Z is coming along with a bit of spending power, a few pennies in their pocket, that they will slowly start turning it around. But I suppose it's businesses think, well, I suppose back to the beginning of this, what difference can I make if I swap? But that's how movements begin, isn't it? If none of us just ever start, then we're knackered. But if we all try and start to do our little bit about what we buy and question how it's made and where it's from or how it's produced, then that's how the change will come.
Exactly. And that's all it takes, is people to be curious and to question, what's generally just taken as a commodity and something that's put in front of you. I mean, most people don't think about where their water comes from on a daily basis. You get up, you brush your teeth, you go to the toilet, you flush the toilet, you wash your face. Your interaction with water is so normalized that people don't question it. And I guess what we're trying to do is say that's a luxury. Not everyone in the world has that, but also we're at risk of not having that in the future if we don't change the way that we operate as a community, as a country, and globally. So for us, it's not really about the product that gets served in hospitality. That's important, but it's the broader story that we really want people to sort of take stock of and reconsider the actions that they take and what they think about and really how they perceive water, which is why our purpose is to change the way the world sees water, because actually that's a bold statement, but it takes lots of people to do that. And we are just one small part of it, but a really important, we hope, catalyst within that.
Yeah. And do you see more and more conversations happening than ever before in terms of that people are trying?
Yeah, I think everyone wants to do their bit. I think sometimes, certainly in the sort of environmental space, sustainability space, people get a little bit overwhelmed by the greenwashing and by trying to figure out what's true, what's not, what should I be measuring, what's the right KPI. And so I think there is almost information overload. And what we try and do is break it down. We are not climate experts, but we've been in this space, operating this way for long enough that we've got enough learnt experience that we know the things and the levers that will influence your carbon footprint and where to put your energies if you're just starting out versus, if you're well established, and, the conversation to have with your scope 3 suppliers. And we've done all of those things. So I think through experience, we can help people in a very practical way, but we're not experts. We would never, we'd never claim to be. But I think there is something about learning from someone who's in it and done it, who hasn't got that scientific background, that's maybe a little bit more real and a bit easier to engage with. And you can ask questions in a way that with an expert, maybe sometimes you You
You won't
daren't.
feel quite as intimidated, would you? Like, can ask the daft question a little bit. But,
Yeah,
I mean, that's how we all learn, isn't it? When we feel comfortable to ask questions rather than just go,
exactly.
"Oh gosh,
Yeah,
what have they just said? I don't know." So I'm just going to
yeah.
keep quiet.
And there's lots of
That,
acronyms.
yeah, there are everywhere.
There are, but more so I think in the sustainability space.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yes, you're right. I have seen bits and pieces of that creeping into everything. We do a lot in the higher education sector. We have one of our agencies is a student recruitment expert, and like you say, the tenders are getting longer and longer, and for the right reasons. That's where change will come when the businesses are forced to change their practices to
Yes,
make money. You know, because that's the
exactly.
only way a lot of them will react, isn't it? Is to
Yeah,
go, we won't win that piece of work. We can't employ those people unless we swap and change and evolve. So
it's an
we'll get
important
there, and
part
it
of it.
always unfortunately comes back to money in some way or the other.
It does.
So tell me a little bit about the structure at Belu then, because you've got Natalie that you share some of the role with, or have you split your
Yes.
roles? Where
Yeah,
go on,
no, so
explain the
we're
flow.
we're co-CEOs. So as I said, I joined the business as Chief Operating Officer, and Nat joined in March 2020, which was a challenging time for a new CEO
And
to
so
join
yeah,
the
perfect
business.
time to get on board.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'd obviously been in the business at that point, what, 5 years or so. And we'd had a conversation as a board about me taking over, but I'd said I didn't want to step up at that point. I didn't want to do it on my own. We talked about job share and said, no, we think that'll be difficult to recruit. And I was like, that's fine. Very happy to interview the new CEO. Was thrilled when Nat said yes, she was joining. And then in the summer of 2020, it was Nat's idea. And she said to me, why don't we do this together? We've got very different skill sets.
Wow.
This
Okay.
makes sense. She's always been a co-founder. So to her, the concept was always, already there in the kind of in the mix. And we sort of played around with it without telling anyone so that we could just see whether or not we would
Yeah.
enjoy it,
Right.
whether
Neat.
it would work. We spent quite a lot of time laying the kind of the groundwork, so making sure that we knew how each other operated, making sure that we knew what our sort of red lines were, talking about our shadow sides, talking about what would happen if it broke down, what would we do to enable the business to not be impacted by the fact that we couldn't
Yeah.
agree on something. So we did put quite a lot of groundwork in during that time. And then once we shared it with the board, they were like, yeah, can see that makes sense. Same with the team. I think it was only one of our investors that said something along the lines of, you can do it because you're women and there's no ego. Which I thought, oh, it's interesting. Interesting that there's that sort of perception. But I think the way that Nat and I have reflected on that particular comment is we do both have egos, but we're highly confident in our lanes, and actually,
Yeah. Okay.
therefore, we're not conflicting. So there is no need for our egos to be damaged by the fact that we are sharing and we mix up what we do. That's the other nice thing is that when I say we have our lanes, it doesn't mean that we've done exactly the same thing for 5 years.
Yeah.
Depending on whether one of us really wants kind of new project or one of us feels that a fresh pair of eyes on an area of the business would be beneficial, we switch up line management, we switch up which departments we're focused on, so it keeps it really interesting for us, and also I guess gives the team the opportunity to see both of us in different ways.
That's fascinating. So what was her base skill set then, Natalie? Then, because obviously you've shared yours in terms of that commercial side and in the
Yeah,
financial side.
so Nat would describe herself as a kind of what she say she has a portfolio career, which means she does lots of different things all at the same time. She had come off the back of being, oh, you're testing my memory now, off the back of
Yeah, don't get it
being
wrong.
the
Now we're recording.
Sussexes. I think it was the Sussexes. It was William and Harry's charitable foundation, and she was in that leadership team. That was where she sort of come from. So when they sort of split, she kind of decided that she wanted to move on. But she's done various different things, and even now what is she? She's City of Westminster, some kind of not the dean, but she is some kind of celebratory role. She does various things, and she did actually run for London Mayor earlier in the year as well. So
Yeah,
when
we
I say
talked
she
about that. Yeah.
has a portfolio career, I mean it's the broadest you can possibly imagine. But that's the thing that she gets excited about, that variety and being able to make a difference in very different ways.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that shared role? Because, like you
Mm,
say, when you talk about it, like we agreed to share it, but like, so I've always, for most of my, when I've been an agency side, always had like a fellow founder, and because it's from the start, you don't even think about it. But like you
mm,
say, we have got naturally, we didn't we didn't start out to say, oh, well, I'm good at this, you're good at that. And like you say, you find your lanes. I think that's lovely language. And you realise that actually it's great to share that journey, because it's tough. It's tough leading a
It's
business.
lonely. It's
Yeah.
lonely at the top. And in hindsight, I look back and think, goodness, thank goodness I said no to leading the business. Because if I'd said yes, come March 2020, I would have been the CEO on my own, facing into
Yeah.
98% of our revenue disappearing overnight. And I
Yeah.
just thought, actually, with Nat, yes, it was scary at times, but actually together we could figure it out and it didn't feel lonely. So to me, it now feels very, very natural. And I think to the team, we did get them to do the senior leadership team. We asked them to do some anonymous feedback with a coach last year, just to make sure that it worked for them. Because actually, it's not just about what's working for us. It has to be working for the leadership team and the team running the business on a day-to-day basis. And the answer was absolutely yes. They can see what our strengths are. They know who to go for whatever it is that they need. So there's clarity there. There is no confusion. And Nat and I talk all day, every day, whether it's messages or, actual, calls. So it's not like they can play us off one another.
Yeah.
We don't let that happen. And we don't need to
Because
let
not
it
enough
happen.
people will try. It was actually
They
going to be my
will.
next question. It was like, because we've had that where whoever's the softer, is it me or my business partner? We'll ask him for the holiday, and I say no, and he goes back. Have you asked Steve? No, I couldn't find him. It's like, yeah, you lying little so and so. But it is, isn't it? Because people still need leadership, whether it's joined or whether it's individual. And I think that's really interesting. The fact you went and asked shows a lot about your character and your leadership style, which is very impressive.
Thank you.
In terms of, because a lot of people go, no, if you don't ask, we will never find out. Going to be like, I'll hide, I'll put my head in the sand.
But I think you have to. I mean, in the same way, if you're working in an open business where you try and make sure that people know where they stand and how they're performing, and feedback is a good thing, there's no reason to shy away from it. So you have to lead by example as well. If we didn't feel that we could ask, that wouldn't have been a great, culturally, that would say a lot about the business and what we really thought, right? Because if you don't ask for feedback, your gut instinct might be telling you probably telling you one of two things. One is you're scared and you've never done this before and it's taking a risk. Or the other is actually, I know deep down something's not right and I don't really want to hear it. And sometimes people are harsh on themselves. And so they think it's going to be the latter. But often it's more the fear, I think, that drives people.
Yeah. And I think most people are nice, aren't they? All right, you
They
get
are.
the odd ones that they'll want to give you feedback to improve it, not just to go, she's not very good at that.
Exactly.
She never answered my email.
No, exactly. And I'm lucky because in a business like Belu, everyone is values aligned. So therefore, people wouldn't. It wasn't going to be difficult, but they might have needed to actually say, do you know what? There are these occasions, and we wanted to give them the opportunity to do that to somebody who wasn't. It wasn't us. It wasn't directly to us. Therefore, they could be as honest as they needed to be.
So you had that as a team, then that baptism of fire that we sort of look back at now, which we
Indeed.
lump as COVID and think it was just a one-off thing. No, it wasn't. It was 2 years of our lives that they actually hit business.
Yes.
What lessons did you take from that? Because obviously the business is still here, so we assume you got a few
We
things
survived.
right.
Oh my goodness, what did we learn? How resilient we are as leaders, actually, I think was probably the first thing. For us, it was a pivotal moment as well as a business. We did look at the business and we could have hibernated the business. We could have, closed it down and gone, do you know what? Our mission is done. We can pay everybody for 6 months and we'll pay all our suppliers and we could close it down responsibly. Or we could take this moment that we now look back at fondly, because it wasn't fond at the time, but, as a gift of time, and we could reimagine what the future might look like. And we could figure out how, when this comes to an end, bearing in mind we thought that was going to be 6 months at the first point.
Sure, that's what Boris told us that was going to happen.
Exactly, thanks Boris, how we might re-emerge and what we might need to do and what we could do whilst we didn't have lots of business and lots of orders to process and all the kind of normal BAU stuff going. What could we do to lay those foundations? And that's what we chose to do. So we wrote a new business plan. We got new investment. We came out of COVID launching our range of mixes and tonics. We came out of COVID.
So you diversified slightly.
We diversified. We also responded to an incoming inquiry that normally would have politely said, really sorry, but we can't work outside of the UK. But on this occasion, we said, actually, do you know what? We haven't got much going on. Let's explore it. And so we came out of COVID deciding that we were going to open in Hong Kong. So not to export our product because that would create an unnecessary carbon footprint
Yeah.
shipping our bottled water across the world,
Yeah.
but actually
Not quite
enabling.
on plan, that,
No,
is it?
exactly. No. But instead, it was around installing filtration machines in hospitality to enable them to
Okay.
stop importing the bottled water that they were serving. And that was in response to somebody who found us in Hong Kong. So we had two sort of new business units, as it were, emerging out of COVID, which pre-COVID wouldn't have been on the radar at all. But that gift of time was quite valuable. And there was a team of 5, 6 of us, I think, at the time. So a really small, tight-knit group of people who could focus their energies on something positive whilst the world around us was feeling slightly chaotic.
So how have you grown since post-COVID then, since you've obviously brought in some new services, you've got an opportunity to then not quite globalise the business, but certainly start to spread into markets and
Yeah.
with the right footprint. So how's that been since?
It's been a whirlwind. I mean, we've essentially doubled the size of the business from a revenue perspective, which is good. So we're moving in the right direction. It takes time though. And I think that's sometimes as a leader, that's the frustration. You want things to change overnight, but it takes time for you to be in the consideration set when people are, refitting offices or they're considering, doing a tender on water and it falls to the bottom of the priority list because actually spirits and wines come up first. And so it takes a lot of time to get people to realize that, maybe we're not the business that we once were and therefore they should come and re-engage with us on product categories that they wouldn't have considered us for. So I think taking that time and being patient with yourself is quite tricky. But, we're going to hit about 10 million for last year, so we are going in the right direction. We've got an amazing group of people in the team now, and everyone knows and is really clear on what they need to do to deliver the plan. And whilst this year we think 2025 is going to be quite a challenging year because of the market dynamics and because of some of the decisions that are being made that are beyond our control, that I think will impact hospitality, we are
Yes. Yeah.
cautiously optimistic, I think is how we've described it to the board. But we feel well placed, deliver for our customers, but also we've got a team who are really focused on what we think the big levers are. And that's a place that we haven't been up until now, because actually it takes a long time to onboard people and get them up to speed and establish, how do we get all these different teams working together when we didn't have all those different teams 5 years ago. So It was just 5 people. So that has taken quite a lot of time and quite a lot of groundwork, but it feels like we've got those really strong foundations, and now's our time to really push those boundaries in terms of those growth aspirations.
And it's interesting what you said earlier. You've obviously drive behaviour through the values that you've spoken around, as in not to say go and learn these and get them tattooed on your forearm sort of thing. The idea that because it's always the same, isn't it? When I can remember when we had small agencies, like you'd literally handpicked your perfect set of people that you'd always worked with. You knew how great they were at their different roles, and you just trusted them beyond. And then gradually, as you grow, that goes, because you don't know that many people, however old you are.
No.
So it's quite interesting, isn't it? How do you keep control? How do you keep them inspired? And I suppose if you've got that lovely heartbeat of value that everybody is behind, because they've joined for the organisation in the first place, you keep some control. Now, you're always going to get different people doing things in different ways, because that's what us humans are like, aren't we?
You have to get comfortable with that, because actually sometimes another person's view on it is better than the original one. It's more relevant for that moment. It resonates better with those customers, so you have to also be willing to, step back and let people fly with the idea or the story and play it back in their own way, in a way that makes sense to them. So as much as I would love to say you can control it all, you have to trust people as well. And you have to trust people to do what's right and do what's aligned to, the values and the kind of the core of the business. And I think having recruited people quite carefully, you hope that's the case, but you never know until you find out otherwise. So my view is, a bit like with kids, I trust them to a point that, actually they've betrayed my trust, and then we need to have a conversation about it.
Yes, let's not go there. There's a whole podcast just in that. So it's brilliant. So obviously 25, you're thinking just like we all are, it's not quite COVID, but some of the challenges that our leaders and the wider global macro impact have thrown at us as business owners. That resilience is going to be needed again, because there's a lot of things that we hadn't forecast and planned to, that we're having to now deal with, and we will, because businesses do, because they're amazing and people are amazing from that point of view. It's annoying, but that's life. We can't do anything about it. And I suppose, can you foresee, get through this year, see things start down, we see a growth, we see a bit of stability around the world, that the future's looking good for Belu?
So I would like to say for Blue, yes, absolutely. I think what we've learned though is that the macro environment hasn't really been stable for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
There's been lots of things thrown at us, and I think what we've learned is that you have to be flexible in terms of how you respond and what you do in a crisis, whether it's a small crisis or, you know, a much bigger crisis. But the uncertainty, I think, is the bit that we've got used to just dealing with, and you can only foresee so much, and you have to plan for the worst, and then you have to hope that actually there is a little bit of magic out there that helps Belu just buck the trend of whatever's going on in the broader market. And I think that's probably where we're focusing our energies, because there's a lot going on that we can't influence, but there's equally an awful lot that we can influence, and that's where we need to focus our energies. So one eye on the risk and the managing that side of things, but actually real team focus on the size of the opportunity, because there is so much opportunity within the market, irrespective of what else might be going on for a business like Belu, which I think is the bit that's really exciting for us.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, because I think you can only control what you can control, can't you? Otherwise, you would just go mad. You'd be like trying to change the world. And I suppose it's then understanding the sort of the pitch you're playing on, so to speak, that you go, right, we can't do anything about that there and that there, so we'll just keep going forward with the team. Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And I think, and that comes back, I suppose, to having that partner in crime next to you, that you're going, is this right? Are we on track? Are we, like, use each other as sort of like, I always talk about the bumpers at the side of a 10-pin bowling alley, that you're both keeping each other in the alleyway in a good way to keep moving forward.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. Everyone's perception is different, right? And so I think maybe when I'm having a day where I'm like, no, this all feels like it's going horribly wrong, and Nat might come in with a very different perspective, having had a conversation with somebody, from another business, and say, no, do you know what? Actually, we haven't considered this side of it, and so you can balance each other out, which I think then gets you to a more rounded view, or a more balanced view, perhaps, of what's going on and how we should respond to it.
Yeah, you give everything a natural challenge, don't you, in a healthy way. I think that's really good, rather than just going with your hip, gut, and off we go. And so what kind of decision maker are you, Charlotte? Are you somebody that will come, although you didn't want to be an accountant by your own admission, are you overly analytical on what you do, or do you just trust what you've learned now?
So I think because I did try to be an accountant, I am quite analytical. So, actually, if the team come to me, they need to come to me with some data. I do love data, but I will look at the data quickly. And I generally have a gut instinct that I let guide me. I didn't for a long time, actually. And I think probably about 4 years ago, I was working with a coach, and she kept saying to me, what does your gut tell you? What's it telling you that you should do? And I was like, oh, I just got this feeling. And actually, she was the one who was like, your gut instinct's right. You need to remember to go with that, because actually, and the way she played it back to me was, what do you do with the kids? Well, I don't know. I just make it up as I go along. It's my gut instinct. It is my gut instinct. That is what trusts me, because I don't have a manual of how to bring up these children. I know there are lots of parenting books, but I've never really prescribed to, there's one way of doing it, because all children are different. And actually, when she demonstrated that I was doing that at home, but for some reason I'd sort of switched off that button at work, it was a complete game changer. A proper light bulb moment was, that's what I need to do. So I'm better at doing that now. But yeah, I'll still revert to some data just to back up that gut instinct.
I think yeah, it's a cracking answer, because I think we all want some data again to make sure we know we're in the right area. And then, like you say, go back to your kids. You've worked out, well, when I acted like that, they had a complete tantrum in the middle of Tesco's and everything went wrong. When I did that worked. So let's, because that's what a gut is for me. It's that collection of experience that you can't write down, but you just go, no, I remember that going really badly last time. So, but the data helps, doesn't it? The data just gives you the confidence to actually use your gut. And that sounds really counterintuitive, nearly, to say.
But it reassures you.
Yeah. And we all need that.
You do.
And so is Natalie a different decision maker? Because that's always interesting if you've got a different basis by which to make decisions.
Yeah, she does like her data. I think she has more of a macro view.
Okay.
So she would probably come in with a more macro view, and she loves a framework. So if it fits a framework, you've
Yeah.
got that.
And that's it. We're all different, aren't we? Some people want that. That's where I'm going to operate. Others are like, don't give me any barriers. I'm going to go up here. But again, really interesting, really healthy. So where can you see growth coming from in the future in terms of, is it to do more of the same, or is it to continue to diversify within the water? Obviously within water, I'm assuming, is at the heart of you. With your name, you're a bit tricky without.
It would be. I mean, the big growth areas for us are still, I mean, it's still mineral water. We're still relatively, small player within the marketplace. And then lots of people are looking at how they move into filtration. So it's the same, it's really the same product set. We might pop up with some different packaging. We might pop up in some different markets from a filtration perspective. So it's kind of more of the same, but sort of amplifying that. But more than anything, for us, it's about brand awareness this year as well. So really changing the dial of people knowing that they should come to us for filtration, but also that we can, we are a big enough business now that we can respond to scale opportunities where people have got multiple sites, multiple hotels, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. And then you bring in the social enterprise element too. Then it's hopefully quite a killer combination, isn't
Fingers
it? So
crossed. Yes.
we'll spread the word starting with this.
Thank
So in
you.
terms, you mentioned a couple of times that you've had investment, and people might be quite interested to hear that, thinking, "Oh, it's a social enterprises. Why would you have big, normally big nasty investors in there?" So how's that work? Is that to help grow, or is that benevolent investment, or what is it?
So, because of our unique structure, we are not attractive to traditional investors. So, we are
Yeah,
really fortunate actually to have the same philanthropic investors that the business was essentially founded with. They don't get a return from the investment that they make. So, they do make it and, expect it to be repaid potentially, but not in the way that they would then get a significant return on that investment.
yeah,
So, it is quite unique, but we did need it to scale the business because actually, if you give all your profits away, it's very difficult to scale a business, but also the changing business model is more capital intense than the old business model had been. So
is that the filtration
it's the
side, so people
filtration side of
understand? Yeah,
things. Yeah,
okay.
the payback on that is slower. So we had to have some level of capital to enable us to actually grow and realize the potential that we could see within the marketplace.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, like you say, they're not a charity, but they're certainly a much better partner than a lot of investors out there
Exactly.
for what you're
Exactly.
doing, let's say.
Yes.
There's lots of different types required. And in terms of the filtration side, then is that how does Belu differ to the competition? Is it because of your the sort of basically the social side of it that you have a better product?
So products really in the marketplace are very, very similar. I think that there are two things really that we try and differentiate ourselves on. I guess one is we are the only social enterprise in the market currently in the UK. Not to say that there aren't others probably starting to do it, but that we are aware of. So really, if people want to choose someone that is purpose driven at its core, then really we're the only people in that position. And then secondly, we would pride ourselves on the service that we deliver, because we know that in the marketplace people can get fairly frustrated with the traditional service providers, and we can see that there is a huge opportunity for that to be disrupted and for us to do it in a very different way, which is really what we're trying to do. But you have to be in the consideration to have that conversation with those that are making the decisions, and that's our sort of biggest challenge.
Okay, yes, but you're in that nice sweet spot at the moment where you can still be reactive and give someone a tailored solution without some of the bigger players just going, you can have it in blue, orange, or white. What do you want?
Yes.
Done. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly that.
But it is, and it should. Back to the comment when I was talking about the university tenders and things like that. Social enterprise and the factors of your carbon footprint are going to play into the suppliers as much as the providers, aren't they? And so it should hopefully continue to strengthen the position of you in the market.
We certainly hope so. Yeah, we hope so because and we have got a story to tell, and I think when people are then thinking about what it means to their employees or what it means to their clients, there is a story here that they could use as part of their impact decisions, in part of their purpose, in part of their give back, and so there's a great story there
There's many
that
angles to this, isn't there? Yeah, than
they
just
just
who.
need to know that that's what we're here for.
Right. Okay. I'll have a think about that. That's a good
Thank you.
challenge.
Do.
And then the other thing is then, so it's WaterAid is the core charity that you work with, isn't it?
Yes.
How do you make sure they're keeping on their toes and that your money is being well spent and well invested?
So the honest answer is we don't in a direct way, because what we do is quite different, I suppose, to lots of people who give charity money, is we give them unrestricted funding. So we say, you spend this money in whatever way makes
Right,
sense,
so you give them that freedom.
rather than saying it has to be this country and this project, which means they can do whatever they need to do with it to enable the charity to deliver the greatest impact across the world. So we do have contact with them, but we purposely don't restrict it. And that is quite a unique position for them, because actually more and more corporate investment is being very much channeled into specific areas, and it might not be the area that's in greatest need potentially. So for us, it's important that they have complete control of what it is that they need to achieve, and that we can then support them in delivering that.
Yeah, I'm smiling because otherwise it's quite interesting hearing you say that, because it's a bit like, right, you're an expert charity in your field, but I'm going to tell you what you should do with your money, and it just doesn't seem right, does it? Because nobody will tell you how to make better water or better products.
And they're not the expert, whereas waters are the experts. So we need to let the experts do the bit that they are.
They know where help's needed, aren't they, in the world?
We don't know that.
Yeah. I once went to Uganda. Can you put it all in there, please? No, they don't need it. They're so yes, brilliant. I love it. But yeah, it's when you hear it said out loud, it's how ridiculous it actually sounds. So
sometimes there's a reason people need that or want that, but that's not how our agreement has been set up, and I think that's it's a strong statement as a result.
I was about to say it's another great big tick in your column, in my view, because it's just like, we know what we're doing. We'll create funds and let the expert then invest them to make a difference. So
exactly.
Other people listen. Brilliant. I love it. I can't believe we're nearly at the end already. I love these. You always know when you have a few questions, like I said to you, there's a few questions to start, and we have been so far everywhere else where I didn't think we'd go, but in a wonderful way. It's been
great.
Beautifully related. So we're going to talk to young Charlotte of just had a couple of kids, didn't know where she was. Is there a piece of advice now, starting this, obviously, sort of pre-Natalie joining, so when you first joined the business, I love to always know, is there a piece of advice you would give yourself now to either save some pain or fast-track the development of yourself?
I think I would tell myself probably to say what I think and trust my gut instinct, to call it out sooner than I did.
Yeah, you could tell that when you were answering that. I could see, and obviously you'd had that coaching, which is great. And I think that's another thing that we sort of brushed over a bit quickly, is there's loads in your career, there's loads of ways to learn, like getting a partner to do it, starting with a partner or finding a partner within it, but always meeting people and listening. And I think coaches, people think, oh, if I see a coach, I'm showing a weakness. No, you're not. You're actually skilling yourself up, and someone else has got an opinion.
It's
and I
really
could tell
valuable.
when you were talking about that's hit you in a cracking way.
It has, it has, really did.
Yeah, because we all forget, when you were telling us about your career at WH Smith's and then at Tesco, right? Not all of it was potentially a positive memory in the end, because there's bits you didn't like about it, like we all do. But that was when you were learning and forming the person that you are and the leader that you are now, because you learn as much about not what to do as to what to do.
Exactly. And all that hard work, even if you don't enjoy it, is so valuable, because it does make you who you are, but it also makes you really clear on what's right, what's wrong, and what you do again and what you really don't want to do again. And I guess as you get older, you have the privilege of being able to choose what it is that you want to do and how you want to do it and how you want to be a leader. So you need to have had some tough times to really be able to celebrate the times that feel joyful, and where things are all going in the right direction, and you can support others in their development too.
That's brilliant. So much to unpack in that bit. I'm going to go on for too long, but I think that's another thing, isn't it? Is you found something that you love now, and if you do that, and if you're lucky enough to do that as your career and as your job, it is brilliant. It doesn't feel like a job, even though you're working hard. You probably work even harder because you love it, and it's an interesting one. But that is the one choice you have. I agree with you. When you get a bit of experience under your belt, because you don't always know what you want. When you're younger, when you got the experience, you go, that's what I like, actually. I didn't know it was called that. I didn't know that was, but I think if you even start to go into a sector or into an area that you've got a natural passion, it'll be better than trying to be an accountant at WH Smith's.
Absolutely. But also goes back to your point around conversations. You don't know who you're going to meet and when you're going to meet them. So you need to take the opportunities as and when they present themselves.
Yeah. Look, well, I've loved this conversation, so thank you very much indeed for giving us your time and sharing your story. I've loved every minute of it.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
It's a pleasure.